While officials in Washington and Pyongyang exchange threats against one another, the People's Republic of China has remained remarkably silent on the matter. It is a common misconception that Beijing has full control over Pyongyang. Thus, when President Trump turns to President Xi to solve the Korean issue, which shows a lack of options for the Americans, it raises the question of what exactly determines China's policy on North Korea. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. To clarify the relations between Beijing and Pyongyang, we need to examine the roots of North Korea's existence. In October 1950, at the backdrop of the Korean War, China's People's Liberation Army and the People's Volunteer Army deployed roughly 1.4 million and 2.3 million troops to support their fellow communists in the Korean War. By the end of the conflict, an estimated 360,000 Chinese troops had lost their lives. A decade later, in 1961, China and North Korea signed a military pact which assured that the former would provide military assistance if the latter was ever attacked. These experiences display Beijing's sacrifices and commitment to its Korean ally. However, relations between the two have not always been met with positive success. A close inspection of China's stance reveals that many policymakers are unhappy with the behavior of the North Koreans. This is perhaps best symbolized in the fact that President Xi of China has never actually met Chairman Kim of North Korea in person. Furthermore, the relations between the two have declined greatly following Kim's purge of high-level pro-Chinese politicians in Pyongyang. The truth is that for China, North Korea serves as a deterrent against American influence in Northeast Asia. Beijing doesn't want the government in Seoul, which is allied with Washington, in control of the Korean peninsula, nor does Beijing want the resumption of hostilities in the area, which would result in a humanitarian catastrophe and create a power vacuum that would invite American intervention. Since both scenarios would diminish the overall security of China, policymakers in Beijing seek to maintain the current status quo. To that end, Beijing has tolerated Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions because it is necessary to safeguard the government of Kim. That being said, since the acceleration of the North Korean nuclear program in 2011, China's geopolitical strategy has increasingly backfired. Under these conditions, Chinese officials have been progressively at odds over their Korean policy. More and more policymakers argue that Pyongyang's belligerent actions do not deter but invite American intervention. As such, for many in Beijing, Kim has become a threat to the balance of power in the peninsula. Still, however, the dominant voice in Beijing, led by President Xi, believes that Chairman Kim needs to transform North Korea as China was able to do so under earlier leadership. And the government of Kim has taken active steps by introducing processes for entrepreneurs to bypass the system and register as state companies to operate firms. In a country where managing a business is illegal, this is a groundbreaking reform. However, a complete overhaul of the North Korean economy will require Beijing to incorporate Pyongyang in the Belt and Road Initiative. This approach would eventually change the behavior of Kim's government, but it would take decades to realize, which the United States and its allies do not have. From American perspective, a nuclear-armed North Korea poses a threat to its soil, but also to the unity of the US-based East Asian alliance, which includes Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Without this network, American influence in Asia would diminish greatly. President Trump, like the previous administrations, seeks to apply conventional sanctions to dissuade Pyongyang from developing credible ICBM capabilities. This policy has thus far failed because the North Koreans have shown no interest in using their nuclear program as a bargaining chip for diplomatic and economic benefits. Meanwhile, Washington has made it clear that it refuses to engage in dialogue with Pyongyang unless the nuclear program is dismantled. Because of this diplomatic stalemate, the United States has relied on China to apply economic pressure on North Korea, since Beijing is the primary source of financial support for the North. This makes China critical to the success of American economic pressure on North Korea. To gain Beijing's cooperation, the Trump administration has resorted to the stick and carrot policy. In some instances, the United States has played nice, and in other areas, it has shown its teeth. For example, in April 2017, following the meeting of the American and Chinese leadership, the former softened its tone on trade issues with the latter. On the other hand, however, in late June 2017, the Trump administration unveiled new sanctions that targeted Chinese businesses that are accused of smuggling and money laundering for the North Korean government. Among the targeted firms was the Bank of Dadong, the Dalian Global Unity Shipping Company, and the Delta Asia Financial Group. Since the targeted firms have little exposure to the American financial system, it means that the sanctions are more symbolic than practical. A more functional example of American pressure on China is Washington's expansion of sophisticated military defense systems in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Officially, the new defense systems are meant as a deterrent against a missile attack from North Korea. In truth, however, the military hardware acts as an instrument to restrain and influence Beijing's policy. Only after North Korea's second ICBM test did Trump's carrot and stick policy receive a reaction from China. As such, in early August 2017, Beijing and Washington reached an agreement, and the United States Security Council voted unanimously to impose new sanctions on North Korea. In the past, sanctions against North Korea were undermined through various loopholes, such as humanitarian relief, which is an exception to UN sanctions. The new resolution, however, depending on the level of commitment of China, seeks to ban coal, iron, seafood, and lead exports from North Korea, which are major sources of income for Kim's government. The latest round of sanctions is expected to reduce North Korea's annual exports by about $1 billion of the total $3 billion. The reduction of export revenues by a third will severely damage the North Korean economy, but be that as it may, like the previous sanctions, conventional penalties are likely to fail because Beijing will only apply enough pressure on Pyongyang to prevent a unilateral intervention by Washington, but not so much that it cuts off North Korea's economic lifeline. For geopolitical reasons, China must preserve the territorial integrity of North Korea. So when the international community unanimously votes for new sanctions, Beijing plays along and appears to punish Pyongyang. Yet in reality, China does very little to change the situation. For instance, in February 2017, Beijing suspended the import of coal from North Korea, but only after China had reached its annual required coal imports for 2017. What's more is that while China cut its coal imports, trade in other minerals climbed sharply to compensate for the cutbacks. Thus, despite appearances, Beijing actually increased the overall trade with Pyongyang. The exercise of sanctions shows that enforcing the regulations is far more complicated than passing the resolutions. The new sanctions will have to account for the fact that China does not want to see the North Korean government collapse, and thus will seek to enforce the sanctions in such a manner that it doesn't undermine the geopolitical state of affairs in the Korean peninsula. In essence, China's policy on North Korea is very much a double-edged sword. Policymakers in Beijing do not appreciate the role of conduct by Chairman Kim because he upsets the geopolitical balance and enables a more coherent US-backed coalition at China's doorstep. Yet on the other hand, China understands North Korea's nuclear ambitions and needs the country as a deterrent in the region. As such, President Xi's policy diverges considerably. He prefers change in Pyongyang, but not so much that it risks the integrity of North Korea. In this context, some Chinese think tanks have even pitched the idea of orchestrating a coup in Pyongyang that retains the overall integrity of the state. Such a scenario is unlikely to occur, but it shows the level of uncertainty in Beijing. For the international community, China's uncertainty appears as indifference to an urgent crisis. Yet, despite the misconception, President Xi must carefully evaluate the sustainability of his conventional policies if he is to prevent a geopolitical fallout in East Asia. This Caspian report was written in collaboration with Yong from Singapore. Also, special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who provide the needs for our independent research and production. Check out patreon.com/Caspian report for more information. As a courtesy and for peer review purposes, we release our content at least 24 hours earlier on Patreon. You also get to vote on future reports and much more. So check out the link if you want to be part of that. In any case, thank you for your time and sağ ol.